He believed he could tame a lion, feed it, teach it, control it, and make it his pet. In the quiet city of Kufa, Iraq, a man made a fatal mistake. He believed he could tame a lion just days after buying it. But on a warm morning in May 2025, that lion turned on him, tearing through his neck and chest, refusing to let go. By the time help arrived, it was too late. He was already partially devoured, in the same garden where he thought he could build trust with a predator. Keep watching. We've uncovered similar real-life tragedies you need to hear about. His name was Aqil Fakhr al-Din, a 50-year-old man known for keeping exotic animals. But this time, the wild didn't bend to his will. It reminded everyone watching, lions do not forget what they are, and nature does not negotiate. This is the terrifying true story of the horrifying last moments of lion owner Aqil Fakhr al-Din in Iraq. Welcome to the Animal Quest channel. If you care about the truth behind real animal attack stories, make sure to subscribe, like, and share, so more people learn what happens when the line between man and beast is crossed. Now, this is how it all started. His name was Aqil Fakhr al-Din, a 50-year-old man who lived in Kufa, a historic city in southern Iraq, known more for its mosques and quiet streets than for exotic animals. But behind the walls of his garden compound, Aqil was building something different. He wasn't just a collector, he was an enthusiast, a man drawn to danger like a moth to flame. Over the years, neighbors had seen glimpses of the unusual, a pair of monkeys chattering from a cage, a python slithering along reinforced glass, and once, a hawk tethered to a wooden post, staring with razor eyes. In a town where livestock and stray dogs were common, Aqil stood apart. Some said he had wealth, others believed he had connections. But what no one doubted was his obsession with wild animals. The more untamed, the better. Those who lived nearby had long whispered about the roars that echoed from his property late into the night. Most dismissed it. After all, this was Aqil, quiet, private, intense, but no one asked too many questions. Not when the man behind the gate seemed to always know exactly what he was doing. That is, until the day he brought home a lion. In the first week of May 2025, under the burning sun of Kufa, Aqil Fakhr al-Din made a decision that would seal his fate. After years of collecting exotic animals, creatures that most people only ever see behind bulletproof glass, Aqil crossed a new line. He brought home a lion, not a cub, not a sick or sedated rescue. A young adult male, powerful and restless, still pulsing with the instinct to hunt. The animal arrived in the early morning, delivered by a contact whose name was never revealed. The exchange was fast, quiet, as if they both knew this wasn't something that could be discussed openly. Inside his garden compound, already home to monkeys, birds, and reptiles, Aqil had prepared a cage, thick metal bars, welded corners, a locked gate. To anyone else, it might have looked secure, but lions don't measure cages. They measure fear. The enclosure sat adjacent to his other animals, like it was just another exhibit, another addition to a private collection that was never meant to exist. Aqil watched the lion pace, admired its muscles, its calm fury. He believed he could tame it, feed it, teach it, control it. Maybe in his mind, it would even come to trust him. But what he didn't realize, what so many before him have failed to understand, is that a cage and confidence are never enough. Because wild instincts may sleep for a while, but they never die. As the days passed in early May 2025, something began to shift in the quiet neighborhood of Al-Jamia district in Kufa. At first, it was just the sound, low guttural roars that rolled over the walls of Aqil Fakhr al-Din's compound like distant thunder. At night, the roars grew louder. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Doors were locked earlier. Conversations among neighbors grew tense. Many already knew about Aqil's unusual obsession with wild animals. But this was different. This wasn't a monkey shrieking or a snake rustling in glass. This was the voice of a predator. According to a source who spoke to Al Ghad newspaper, the lion appeared visibly agitated. It paced in its enclosure nonstop, its movements restless and sharp, like something waiting to be unleashed. Some claimed it wasn't being fed properly. Others said it was too confined, its instincts pressing hard against steel bars and concrete floors. Whispers of concern turned into murmurs of fear. One man told local media he had considered reporting the lion, but chose not to, out of respect or perhaps out of fear. After all, Aqil Fakhr al-Din wasn't a man many questioned. He seemed to walk with the quiet confidence of someone who thought he knew better than nature itself. And when people warned him, he didn't listen. Because to Aqil, this lion wasn't a threat. It was a trophy, a symbol, a challenge, one he believed he could master. But behind the iron bars, the lion was already changing. Each hour it grew more anxious, more aware, more dangerous. And soon the cage wouldn't be enough. It was Friday morning, May 9th, 2025. The sun had just begun to rise over Kufa, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of the Al Jamia district. Birds chirped faintly in the distance. For most of the city, it was just another peaceful start to the day. But inside one particular walled compound, something far more dangerous stirred. At approximately 7:30 a.m., Aqil Fakhr al-Din, dressed in a plain shirt and light trousers, walked into the heart of his garden. He was alone. No assistants, no tranquilizers, no emergency protocols. Just him and the lion. He carried no tools, no barriers. According to one neighbor, he believed the lion would respond to dominance. That if he showed fearlessness, the animal would respect him. It wasn't the first time Aqil had entered the enclosure, but it would be the last. The lion was standing when he approached, its golden fur catching the morning light, eyes locked on his every step. Perhaps Aqil thought it was calm. Perhaps he believed the bond he imagined was real. But lions don't measure history. They measure opportunity. And that morning, the cage door opened, and the lion took it. In a flash of muscle and instinct, the beast lunged forward with a force that shattered the silence. The first bite landed at Aqil's throat, crushing soft tissue and silencing any command he might have tried to give. Then came the claws, ripping into his chest, shoulder, and abdomen, dragging him to the dirt. He tried to scream. A choked, desperate cry echoed across the compound walls, loud enough that neighbors would later say they thought someone was being murdered. And in truth, they weren't wrong. The lion didn't hesitate. It pinned him down with the weight of its full body, teeth clamped into bone, tearing into the man who just moments before had stood over it with the confidence of a tamer. But Aqil was no longer in control. He was prey. By the time the first neighbor reached the gate, the garden was a scene of horror. Aqil's body was motionless, his upper torso torn and bloodied, pieces of his clothing shredded and stained red. The lion crouched over him, breathing heavily, still guarding its kill. It had not just attacked him, it had partially devoured him. And it wasn't done. Even after the gunshots came, even after the roaring stopped, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the terrifying realization that no one, not Aqil, not his neighbors, not his city, had ever truly understood what they were dealing with. The cage had opened, and the wild had done what it always does. It took back control. The screams tore through the still air of Kufa's Al Jamia district, like a warning siren no one could ignore. One neighbor described the sound as inhuman, a mixture of agony and terror that made his blood run cold. Within moments, people from nearby homes were pouring into the narrow street, unsure of what they were hearing, unsure of what they were about to see. Then someone shouted, "It's the lion! Aqil! The lion's got him!" Panic set in. The gates to the compound had been left unlocked, perhaps in the chaos, perhaps because Aqil had never imagined he'd need them closed. A man, reportedly a relative of Aqil, burst through the entrance and sprinted across the garden. What he saw stopped him cold. The lion, massive, blood-slicked and heaving, stood hunched over Aqil's body, its jaws still clamped around the lifeless man's torso. Aqil was unrecognizable, his neck torn open, his chest caved in. The garden was soaked in blood, but the lion wasn't snarling, it wasn't pacing, it was still, as if it were guarding its meal. The man didn't hesitate. He raised the weapon in his hands, a Kalashnikov rifle, likely kept in the house for emergencies, and took aim. He fired once, then again. A total of 7 rounds exploded into the lion's body. The beast roared once and collapsed beside Aqil, its head hitting the earth with a dull thud. But even in death, it wouldn't let go. Its body remained curled against Aqil's, massive paws still draped over the man's shredded remains. It was as though some primal instinct refused to release the claim. Minutes later, emergency responders arrived, too late for anything but recovery. Aqil's remains were loaded into a body bag and transported to Al Sadr Medical City Hospital in Najaf, where officials could barely believe what they were seeing. And there, lying in a pool of blood, surrounded by twisted cages and broken silence, was the lion, lifeless, but still a symbol of everything Aqil thought he could control, and didn't. Inside the hospital's morgue, doctors confirmed what everyone already feared. Aqil had suffered catastrophic injuries to the neck and chest. His body had been partially consumed. The lion had not just killed him, it had fed on him. That shocking fact would echo across newsrooms and households for days. Local law enforcement immediately launched an investigation, not just into the attack, but into how such a creature had ended up in a residential garden in the first place. Where did the lion come from? Who sold it to him? Was it registered, tracked, monitored? The early answers were as troubling as the attack itself. Aqil had acquired the lion through unofficial channels, likely bypassing legal permits and animal welfare regulations. There were no safety measures, no veterinary oversight, just a cage and a dangerous illusion of control. And so what began as a personal tragedy quickly escalated into a national wake-up call. One investigator, speaking anonymously, told a local station, "This wasn't an accident. This was a disaster waiting to happen." In the days that followed, the Iraqi public demanded answers. How did this man in a quiet part of Kufa gain access to a fully grown lion? Why were there no inspections, no accountability? And how many others might be hiding wild predators behind garden walls just like he did? Because Aqil's death was no longer just a story of one man and one lion. It was now a mirror held up to a system that had looked away for far too long. And for the first time, no one could look away anymore. The blood hadn't yet dried in the garden of Al Jamia district when the first video began to circulate. A shaky recording, taken from a neighbor's phone, showed a blurred image of the lion's lifeless body sprawled in the dirt. Around it, pools of blood, twisted fencing, the unmistakable outlines of other cages. The footage hit the internet before authorities could contain the scene. And once it was out, there was no turning back. Within hours, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok were flooded with reposts, some in shock, some in anger, many unable to believe what they were seeing. Why was a full-grown lion kept in someone's backyard? This was murder on both sides. The lion paid for a human's arrogance. The hashtags began to trend. Justice for the lion, dash ban exotic pets, dash Aqil Fakhr din. And then came the outrage, not just from Iraq, but from around the world. Animal rights organizations condemned the situation, calling it a textbook case of human recklessness leading to avoidable death. Others pointed fingers at the government. Why were there no checks? How did a man with a known history of owning wild animals gain access to a lion without oversight, without regulation, without consequence? Some tried to defend Aqil, claiming he had only ever loved animals, that he wasn't a monster. But the overwhelming majority asked a more urgent question. How many more Aqils are out there? Debate ignited in cafes, classrooms, and newsrooms. Should exotic animal ownership be regulated more tightly or banned altogether? Because in the eyes of the public, this wasn't just about one man's death. It was about the cost of pride, the illusion of control, and a lion that never should have been there in the first place. What happened in Kufa was no longer just local news. It had become a global reckoning. In the days that followed Aqil Fakhr al-Din's death, as the footage continued to circle the world, experts began stepping forward. Wildlife specialists, zoologists, and conservationists, many of whom had been warning of cases like this for years, now had the world's attention. In interviews with Shafak News and Rudolph, their message was clear. Lions are apex predators, not companions. You cannot tame what has evolved to kill. They describe the lion as a creature designed by nature for one thing: survival through dominance, strength, aggression. No amount of affection, repetition, or familiarity could erase what was hardwired into its blood. And this, they said, was not the first time tragedy had followed arrogance. They pointed to the 2020 incident in South Africa, where a private owner was killed while feeding his captive lions, or the 2018 case in Czech Republic, where a man raised a lion from birth, only to be mauled and killed in his own backyard. Or even earlier, in the United States, where exotic pet owners faced fatal encounters with tigers, lions, and other large cats kept in enclosures too small to contain their instincts. In every story, the pattern was the same. A person convinced they could bond with something built for the wild, and a predator that didn't understand sentiment, only dominance and survival. Aqil's death, they warned, was not a freak accident. It was a certainty. The moment he opened that cage door, the countdown began. As one expert put it bluntly, this wasn't just a fluke, it was a ticking time bomb that finally exploded. And tragically, Aqil wasn't the only one standing too close to the blast. What happened in Kufa was horrifying, but it was not unique. Just weeks earlier, in the rural outskirts of Nairobi, Kenya, a 14-year-old girl was asleep in her family's modest home when a lion escaped from Nairobi National Park. It leapt a fence, crept through a residential compound, and dragged the girl outside before anyone could react. Her body was found later, shredded, lifeless, deep in the underbrush. She had no weapons, no warning, no chance. A life taken in seconds, not in the wild, but at home. Half a world away in India, another tragedy was unfolding. At a zoological park, a seasoned 52-year-old zookeeper entered a lion enclosure without backup. He had done it many times before, but that day he made two fatal mistakes. He forgot to close the gate, and he went in alone. What followed was brutal and immediate. The lion, unprovoked, unrestrained, and deadly, pounced. By the time his colleagues arrived, the man was already beyond help. And like Aqil, he had underestimated the one thing he couldn't control: instinct. These stories, though scattered across continents and cultures, form a chilling pattern, one that is hard to ignore. A pattern of humans pushing past boundaries that should never have been touched. Exotic pet ownership, overconfidence in captive environments, the fatal belief that dominance over nature can be earned, or worse, assumed. And when it fails violently. The lesson isn't buried in mystery, it roars in blood and silence over and over again. Because no matter how many times we think we've conquered nature, nature always reminds us it never agreed to be conquered. In the final seconds of his life, Aqil Fakhr al-Din was face down in the dirt, his body torn open, his strength gone, and his illusion shattered. A man who once walked among wild animals with confidence now lay beneath one, helpless, bleeding, and dying. The lion he had fed, housed, admired, had turned on him with the full force of its nature. Not out of malice, but because it was a lion, and lions do not make promises. Aqil's final moments were spent in terror, at the mercy of the very creature he believed he could control. His screams, once sharp and human, faded beneath the heavy breath of the predator looming over him. And when silence returned to that garden in Kufa, it came with a lesson few will forget. Because this was never just a freak accident, it was the inevitable cost of ignoring nature's laws. The price of pride, the final chapter in a story written long before the cage door ever opened. This was not just a tragedy, it was a warning written in blood, broadcast to a world that continues to forget. Wild is not meant to be owned, and the wild never forgets what it is. As the dust settles over Aqil Fakhr al-Din's garden, the cage now stands empty. No roars, no movement, just silence, and the memory of what should never have happened. Should exotic pets like lions be banned completely? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this story made you stop and think, like, subscribe, and share for more real stories of animal encounters gone wrong. Because every view, every voice brings us closer to understanding the true cost of taming the untamable. Thanks for watching and wait for our next video.